name's Kim and this is my February wrap up. I can't believe we're at the end of February already. January felt like the longest month ever, and yet February feels like it's gone by so fast. My reading this month was a little bit slower. I read 9 books this month, which is a little bit less than average for me. I tend to hit around 11 books a month. That seems to be kind of like the sweet spot of what I normally hit. My average rating was a 3.4 and I DNF'd 1 book, which you will have seen the other day. So overall, fairly decent reading month. I didn't have a 5-star. It was a majority 3-star reading kind of month, but I thought I'd go through and show you the books that I have read and also talk about the books that I didn't read for videos to give you a bit more insight as well. So this is my lovely collection of books that I read this month. Only 5 of these were for videos, the other 4 were just books that I picked up on my own. Before I get into which books I enjoyed the most this month, which is something that I've realised I forgot to do last month that I wanted to include, I'll go through the books that I haven't spoke to you about yet so you can find out what I thought about them. So the first is Carl's Doomsday Scenario. This is the second book in the Dungeon Crawler Carl series and it follows Donut and Carl as they continue down this dungeon beneath the earth, as they hit level 3, as they choose their race and their class, as they really start to get an understanding of what's going on where they are. This one was a 3.5 for me. I did like it. I thought it still had the same humour that really got me into the series, but it was a little bit slower, which I think it needed to be. You can't have it always just be this kind of mishmash of dungeon crawling. You're starting to get the backstory of the world. The characters are having these realisations and then we're also having these realisations as well. Ultimately, it was just a little bit meandery at times for me. There's a lot of side quests that I get introduced to, which is great. I think it really starts to build the character, but it just felt a little bit slow in places for me. And I think reading it so soon after having read Dungeon Crawler Carl probably is what made it a little bit less enjoyable for me, just because I like that one so much. But then a couple of books later I picked up the Dungeon Anarchist Cookbook, which is a mouthful. All of these books are a mouthful to say. And I gave that one 4 stars. It is so confusing. There's an author's note in the beginning of the book that says, hey, just a heads up, this is going to be a really confusing book, but it's that way on purpose because the character's meant to be confused. So if you feel confused, it's okay, it'll get explained. And I think that was necessary because the way that this level is set out is so confusing, and at times I was getting a little bit lost in the kind of craziness of it all. Like there was just so much going on with the level that they were trying to understand that it was almost bogging it down a little bit. But ultimately the character development in book 3 is really what pulled it through for me. I was kind of flickering between 3.5 and 4, but ultimately I enjoyed it more than book 2, so that's why it ended up being a 4. Character development for not only Carl and Donut, who obviously are our main characters, and we were already starting to see those beats even in book 1. There was hints of it. They really started to pick up in book 2, and then in book 3 I think you really start to see how the idea of what their relationship was in book 1, where it's this man and his ex-girlfriend's cat, is just really not the truth. You really start to unpick what they feel for each other and they felt even before they fell into the dungeon. And then we have other characters like Katia in book 2. She kind of was just there and book 3 things really started to pick up with Katia's character. And then we also have the other side characters as well. We're starting to get a lot more from other crawlers, and they're starting to get more into this main story. We're starting to unravel more what this main plot is in the world, and I'm really starting to like it. I said that I was probably gonna slowly pick at this throughout the year, but realistically I'm already thinking about when I can pick up the next book, which probably isn't going to be next month because I have so many reading plans planned, but I kind of am going to see if I can squeeze it in. The next book I read is What Does Israel Fear from Palestine by Raja Shehadeh. This is a short book and it's more of an essay written by Raja Shehadeh, who is a human rights lawyer and still lives in Palestine. It very much focuses on what's happening currently. It was published late last year. It talks a lot about what happened in the 80s and 90s. It compares the genocide in Gaza with what went on in South Africa and apartheid, and how things are not the same, and how the spotlight in South Africa on apartheid began to change things, and yet the opposite seems to be happening with Israel. They don't seem to be doing the same. It ultimately talks a lot about how Israel doesn't seem to be giving up and how they kind of want complete annihilation of Palestinians essentially. I wrote down a quote which is not entirely new in the sense that this is something, as someone who's a history graduate, you can kind of see how this is playing out if you really start to think about what Israel's doing. The destruction of these sites is part of the battle over perception and memory. We Israelis seem to believe that the land belongs to whoever controls the past. If we deny the Palestinians their memory of the past, we can also deny their attachment to the land and thus pave the way for their expulsion. This is not a new idea. And as I said, it's something that I can see replicated from Nazi Germany, for example, and you can see it now in the way that American politics and Trump is getting involved in what's happening in Gaza, and just attempting to take over this land where people have lived for so many years, with no real care for the people who live there or the genocide or anything like that. It's definitely not a history of what has happened between Israel and Palestine. There are definitely more in-depth books that go into that, but it is a really nice insight into what it is like to be there currently, what the sort of thoughts around the situation are from someone who has worked in human rights and lives in Palestine. Roger Shahada also writes quite frequently articles. He's got a couple for The Guardian from the past couple of months, so well worth checking out if you want a little bit more insight into what continues to go on. Then the final book that I read was Outrageous by Paul Baker. This is a history of Section 28 in the UK, which is legislation that bans schools from promoting homosexuality. This was a big thing in the 80s in the UK. It's something that I know about as a history graduate. It's something that I touched on in my studies, but I didn't really go in depth, and this was a really detailed, in-depth look at how the act came to fruition, who the main players were in it, how the kind of tide and attitudes were changing over time. It also gives insight into the activist groups at the time, and also it's intersected with Paul Baker's own memories as someone who grew up in this time period, what he felt as a gay teenager, and how what went on really had an impact on him as well. It is something that I just find interesting to read about. It's something when I think about my own schooling and I try to think about how being gay was or wasn't promoted. At the end of the day, Section 28 ended within my lifetime. It ended in the early 2000s, and whilst by the time I was in high school it had been gone for over a decade, I definitely think that it's interesting to think about how the repercussions may still have had an effect. I don't recall at all being taught about gay people in school, or even about what a different multitude of relationships could be like. The sex education I had at school was very weak, and so it is interesting to read. Paul Baker has a couple of other books talking about the Polari language, which would be interesting to pick up as well. I gave this one 4 stars. I think that if you're interested in British political history, it's a good thing to take a read of. Because it is British political history, it is pretty dense at times, so that's just something to bear in mind if you're going into it. I realised as well I didn't say a rating for what Israel has to fear from Palestine. I decided not to rate it. I don't think it needs to be rated. I think it is just a standalone essay. So yeah, not rating that one. In terms of favourites, I decided I was going to do this last month and then forgot in the video. So just talking about what books were my kind of top reads of the month. I had 3 4 stars this month. I would say The Dungeon Anarchist Cookbook is probably my favourite from this month. But Sing the Four Quarters was really a hidden gem for me. I really wasn't expecting to enjoy it as much as I did, and so it's definitely one that I recommend if you're interested in 90s fantasy, books about bards, or just want a relatively easy read. I think that is all from me. March, I spent last night writing out some of my reading plans, and it's probably going to be a pretty books for videos heavy month. I've got 2 kind of slightly larger projects that I'm going to work on. So I will see you in a couple of weeks, probably with my next video.